Tonight on Conversations. One of the most recognizable women in the country. And she may just have one of the toughest jobs in America. Don't miss the exclusive interview with Sarah Huckabee Sanders. Next on Conversations.
I often spend hours researching information for an interview, but this one, well, it was a bit different. I spent my preparation time making sure I didn't tell all I knew, like childhood nicknames, embarrassing adolescent stories, or offhanded remarks made at family gatherings. But as you're about to see, I may have forgotten to leave out some stuff that my guest had hoped that I would. But she's still going to speak to me, because she's not just my guest. She's my daughter, known to most people as the press secretary to the President of the United States, Sarah Huckabee Sanders. You talked about your preparation for a briefing. You have a time where you read a devotional from a book called Jesus Calling and spend a little time even in prayer before you go out there. I've been in your office prior to you getting ready. That door is closed and your staff knows, better not interrupt. It's that important to you. Why that devotional book? What is it about it that speaks to you, and how does that help prepare you to go out there and face that howling mob of journalists?
In one part, it's short, and so I'm usually pretty pressed for time. So it's quick, but it also, more importantly, has one page, very practical application for every day. And it's a daily read, and no matter what is happening in the world, it seems to always fit what the need is for that moment. And the reason I like it is because it's just a moment of quiet, it's a moment of peace. Usually there's chaos before in the prep session, and then the briefing itself can be an intense time. And so having just a 5 or 6 minutes to check out and do a, again, moment of quiet, moment of peace, and a quick prayer to sort of settle and get my head in the right space before I go out is important.
And one of the reasons I want to sort of camp out on that is because people who are watching this are busy. They've got kids, they've got jobs, they have all sorts of things, and they probably say, I just don't have time to have these quiet moments with God. You clearly believe that no matter how busy you are, that's an important part of your day, of your life. And I think it may speak to people all over the country who might not feel like they have time to carve that out.
My argument would be the busier you are, the more important it probably is for you to take that moment to slow down and have even 2 or 3 minutes of quiet alone to gather your thoughts, but also to focus on something greater than yourself, something more important than the work that you'll do that day, is the legacy and the connection that you can have even in a short and very quick time to again kind of bring you back to what's most important.
I think that we need to move towards a certainly more fair, more accurate, and frankly, a more responsible news media for the American people.
How many people are just in your immediate circle in the press office? Because I don't think a lot of people understand that it's not just you. You have a full team and staff of people who are there.
Right. So the press office itself has about 8 people, and then the communications staff has about 20 people, and there's a lot of overlap in work that we do between the 2 offices. So a number of people that help push and promote the president's message. Some of the most talented, hardworking, dedicated servants in the country.
And many of them work very quietly behind the scenes.
Most
and
of them
probably
do.
like it that way.
Yeah, I think they've seen what happens to some of those of us who are a little more public, and I think they're pretty happy staying behind the scenes.
You ever feel like shark bait walking out there into the podium?
No, I think we have a great story to tell, and we have a really good message, and I believe in the policies that we're putting forward, and I look at it as an opportunity to go out and try to sell some of that stuff and get to tell the story that most of the media refuses to cover.
You did not say in the course of those remarks that you just made that the press is not the enemy of the people.
I've addressed this question. I've addressed my personal feelings. I'm here to speak on behalf of the president. He's made his comments clear.
Help us understand what your real job is when you go out there, and why you don't answer some of those questions by Jim Acosta from CNN.
Look, no one in America voted for me to do anything. They voted for President Donald Trump, and he's the person who they came out and overwhelmingly supported in 2016. And those people voted for the policies and the agenda that he laid out, and very specifically laid out during the campaign. Like it or not, he told America exactly what he was going to do. And my job is to go out there and talk about that agenda, talk about those policies, defend those when people disagree with it, explain why we think they're important, explain why cutting regulations is important, explain why tax cuts matter. And so that's my goal, is to try to talk about the policies. Now, as you know and you've watched, we often don't get to talk about a lot of policies in the briefing, and we end up talking a lot more about palace intrigue and who likes who that day and who's up, who's down. And so I try to pivot as much as possible back to what I think most Americans care about, which is the economy up or down? Are schools going to be better or worse? Are we moving the country in the right direction?
I want to play a little clip from the briefing room where you have to sort of calm them down. Let's watch.
The question that
But
I
when
have,
journalists make honest mistakes, they should own up to them. Sometimes, and a lot of times you don't. But there's a difference. There's a very big, I'm sorry, I'm not finished. There's a very big difference between making honest mistakes and purposefully misleading the American people, something that happens regularly. You can't say, I'm not done. You cannot say, that it's an honest mistake when you're purposely putting out information that you know to be false.
So I remember saying to you that there are times when I'm not sure I'm watching the press secretary or I'm watching the mother of 3 of my grandchildren calm them down and tell them to be quiet and be seated. So which is it?
Sometimes it's a little bit of both. I often say that the best preparation I have for my job is being a mom to 3 small kids, partly because you answer the same question over and over again. You get used to saying no a lot, so there are a lot of similarities, and certainly I think in those moments my mom voice, if you will, probably comes out.
Yeah, I think we were seeing a little bit of that in the clip from the White House briefing room. It is hard to get.
And my kids don't listen any more than the press does, so maybe I need to work on my tactics.
You get cartooned and lampooned and harpooned by comedians and late night talk shows. Do you take it personally ever?
Occasionally. I try not to focus on the critics. The thing I find most disappointing is it's just not funny. I actually can appreciate self-deprecating humor, and every once in a while there's some things that are pretty funny, but I figure we give them so much material they could at least be funny. Instead, I find it sad that they're just mean.
Let's talk about one of the uglier moments, the White House Correspondents' Dinner.
And I'm never really sure what to call Sarah Huckabee Sanders. Like, what's Uncle Tom but for white women who disappoint other white women?
You were invited to go. You sat there. They had I'll say a so-called comedian who even the people in the room didn't think was very funny, but was vicious, 4 feet away from you, just basically turned to you, and it was like one of the most bullying moments I think I've seen in public. You sat there, you didn't get up, throw a plate at her, or walk out. And a lot of people, I think, were very impressed, even people that may not agree with your political point of view. Did you want to get up? Did you think about getting up?
Certainly all those things cross my mind. Do I leave? Do I stay? Do I throw my salad fork at her? You look at all your options, but in that moment, I decided that walking away to me looked weak, and it made it look like her attacks impacted me, when really I thought they impacted her far more than they were ever going to impact me. It said so much more about who she is than about who I am. And I don't know her. The first time I'd ever met her was a few minutes before we both walked onto that stage. And I didn't want to let somebody that doesn't know me, that doesn't know anything about me, define who I am. And if I walked away, I felt like she got to do that. And if I sat there, I felt like I got to define myself. And I felt like it was important to stay in my seat and push through, so I did.
So being in a political family, you grew up with this stuff. A lot of people would be shell-shocked when they first find out how harsh and vicious it can be. Were you better prepared and maybe not quite so stunned by how difficult it can be to be in a public eye?
I don't think you can probably ever be fully prepared for an onslaught of personal attacks, but I do think I was probably better at blocking them out and compartmentalizing and not focusing so much on the critics. And some of that is certainly from growing up in an environment where that was unfortunately common practice, to watch my family be attacked, or sometimes myself directly. But I think it helped in a way, I guess probably give you a little bit tougher skin, but I think most importantly is to block it out more so than it is to absorb it and try to deflect it. I found that to be far better than having tough skin, is having a focused attention on what's actually important and letting the task at hand be what the focus is versus the critics surrounding it.
In that role of dealing with political things that you've spent your life in, why do it? I mean, because I think a lot of people say, if you saw how rough it was and you grew up that way, what caused you to say, you know what, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get involved in politics and public policy and government, as opposed to saying, I want nothing whatsoever to do with that?
Well, I think it's simple because I got to see the other side too. I got to see the impact of the work that you did, particularly as a governor for almost 11 years. I traveled all over the state, but also all over the country, and heard time and time again stories from families who were better because of the things that you had done as governor. So sure, you get to see some of the negative stuff and you feel that, but you also get to see people's lives changed. And that's far more impactful than somebody saying something negative about you.
We talked about big moments of history that you were eyewitness to. And you've mentioned things like the meeting with Kim Jong-un, going to Helsinki when the president met with Vladimir Putin, trips to the Middle East. When you are in those moments, and you've alluded to it in a general way, but specifically, how do you process that and just say, my gosh, this is a long way from being a high school student at Central High in Little Rock, Arkansas, to sitting on the edge of history?
I think it's almost impossible at times to process and in the moment fully even appreciate like what you're witnessing. Sometimes it's not until after that you have time to slow down and really let it sink in how amazing of an opportunity it is to be on the front row of history. And when you have time to slow down and really think about it, it's incredibly humbling to get to be not just present, but actually get to participate in part of the process. And I've often said, not just those big moments, but even walking into the White House. If you ever get to a point where you walk in and you don't have a sense of reverence or a sense of respect and excitement for the opportunity, but also the responsibility you hold in the role that we have, then it's probably time to go home.
In the second part of my conversation with Sarah Huckabee Sanders, I asked her about her academic preparation for being the presidential press secretary. And she explains why she once sued me. That's right, her own father, in federal court no less. And she finally reveals why she wears a string of pearls almost every day. President Donald Trump truly appreciates his press secretary. Now here's what he told me about Sarah.
Your daughter is a great person. She is a great human being, and she stepped in, and it's not easy. You know, you have a lot of haters out there screaming questions. When I look at those people, they're just hating. They never thought this was going to happen, and it happened for a lot of good reasons. But she has done it with brilliance and with coolness, and we're very, very happy with the job she's doing. Sarah's a very exceptional person.
You went to Ouachita Baptist University, a small Christian college in Arkansas. Did that prepare you feel adequately for what you're doing now?
One of the things I learned the most while I was at Ouachita is how important relationships are, and what true friendship means. And I think in moments, particularly on some of the very hardest days, those are some of the things that matter most, is making sure that those relationships are genuine, that you have loyal friends. And I certainly found that there. On the academic side, I feel, I guess, as prepared as you can be. You're moving 1,000 miles a minute, and so we often like to say you're walking a tightrope with no net. And some days you probably feel better prepared than others, but it's not because on those days, it's never because of my education that I don't feel prepared. And then also a foundation of deep faith that was strengthened while I was in college at a small private school, I think, are some things that have really helped through the process.
Let's talk about that academic preparation a little bit more. Central High School, Little Rock, Arkansas, one of the most famous high schools in America because of something that wasn't so pleasant from back in 1957, when the then governor of Arkansas stood at the door and told 9 students who were African American they could not come in. When you were there, it was an incredibly different campus. What was Central High School like in 1997, 40 years after that moment?
It had persevered through a very rough time, and a time that could have left a mark on the school to be, I think, something that remained negative forever. And instead of letting that be what defined what Central High was about, on the 40th anniversary, you had all 9 of the Little Rock 9, as well as the President of the United States, who was Bill Clinton at the time, the governor, you, and the mayor, open the doors to those 9 instead of closing them, and watching thousands of people erupt in loud applause. And to see the transition of what was so different from 40 years ago to that moment is just incredibly powerful, and something I was proud to get to be a part of and get to witness and understand how far we had come.
A famous moment during your college years was you sued your dad. I don't know if do you remember that?
Yeah, I remember.
Why don't you recount what happened and why you sued me?
First, just to be clear, you encouraged me to do that.
Yes, I did. I must admit.
We were, like you said, we went to a very small Christian school, but the community that the college campus was in was pretty Democrat. It had been a liberal Democrat stronghold for a long time. And we did a massive voter registration drive among the student body, where we registered, I think, between 85 and 90% of the students. So it was enough that we could impact, if we could also then turn out even 50% of the student body that we had gotten registered, it would impact some of those local elections. And that was our plan, was to try to change even some of those seats one at a time in the area where we got to vote. And so in Arkansas, the law requires that you're registered to vote 30 days out. And on day 29, the county clerk deemed all of us that were college students ineligible to vote, and said that that wasn't our permanent residence and that we couldn't claim it to be, and therefore our vote couldn't count. And it also meant we were too late to register anywhere else. So they had essentially stripped away our ability to vote in the state for that election cycle. There were several of us, 5 or 6 of us, that were specifically named on the lawsuit. And interestingly enough, we partnered up with the ACLU to represent us because we figured they'd love a good voting rights case. And so we partnered with them. I was specifically named one because I think people thought it was good optics for me to be suing you. But the other part was I had actually been called to serve on jury duty and sat during the summer earlier that year for several weeks on a trial there in that county. And I served, and I actually got called to be part of a jury and watched a manslaughter case and did the whole thing. And as you know, the jury duty is based on your voter registration. So therefore, they deemed my voter registration good enough to serve on their jury, but not good enough to actually cast a ballot. And so there were a number of specific instances like that we used, and we ended up winning the case and helping set the standard that allows college students to vote wherever either their hometown or where they go to college and determine that they're permanent residents.
I mean, it was really a national landmark case that sort of set a legal precedent, not just for Arkansas students, but students all across America, to give them voting rights so they're not disenfranchised from their own process. Nearly every day, you wear a string of pearls on your neck.
I do.
It's become like a trademark of who you are, and people know that if there's pearls on your neck, it must be Sarah. What's the story behind the string of pearls? I know it.
I would hope you know the story since
do.
it involves you. You and Mom gave these to me on my wedding day. It was a significant moment in my life, something I'm very proud of. I have the most amazing husband in the world, and he puts up with me throughout this whole process and is such a perfect partner in all of this that I'm happy to take that and a little piece of both of my parents with me every day up to the podium.
You do have a remarkable husband. How does he feel when he sees the attacks on you? It's got to be tough for Brian.
Yeah, he's certainly being protective, doesn't like it. I try to tell him, and don't read any of that stuff, just don't pay attention. But he doesn't have the ability to do that quite as easily and block it out. So certainly he gets upset and bothered by it, but thankfully he also has a strong sense of faith, and I think between the relationship that we have figured out that if we stick together, then none of the rest of the noise will ultimately matter.
How do you protect your children? They're all small, 6, 5, 3. So how do you keep them from hearing stuff, being exposed to stuff that might be hard for them to process about what's being said regarding their mother?
Well, thankfully, because they are small, they're not watching a lot of the news. In fact, I think they find me being on the news not to be very exciting. And typically they'd rather watch Mickey Mouse or something else instead of see me on TV. So it helps that they are younger, because their classmates at school aren't sitting around watching the news a lot. And so they're a little bit more insulated from that. And when there are moments that come up and they experience something, we just try to explain. Sometimes people aren't nice, and you don't like it when other people aren't nice to you, which is a great reminder to always treat everyone the way you want to be treated. And we try to use that as a time to explain why we want to be better and be good to everyone we come in contact with.
On many occasions at the White House podium, you've mentioned motherhood. Talk about the role of being a mom, how that is something you can balance with a job that is probably as high pressure as anything that any American faces.
I'm sure some days I don't balance as well as I would like to, but in the moments that I do have and the time I do have with my kids, I try to make sure that it's intentional. I try to set my phone aside for blocks of time, both in the morning and the evenings, that are just with them. And also try to, do things that they enjoy doing. But I also try to bring them into stuff that I'm doing sometimes.
And they've gone into the Oval Office and jumped up in the president's lap in their Halloween costumes. And do they have any clue how unique that is?
Unfortunately, no. I don't think they have any appreciation. I think they know it's cool, but I don't think they fully understand what a neat thing it is to be able to come in on Halloween in your costume and high five the president in the Oval Office. But
I've never done that.
Well, I hope not. We've got pictures that we'll show them one day, and hopefully they'll be able to appreciate it then.
I want to close on a more personal level. You've discussed going to Walter Reed, going to see our veterans, our real heroes, people who've truly paid a price. How does it impact you on a very personal level?
They're some of the most amazing, just true heroes that you could ever meet. There was a guy named John Peck who I got the chance to meet the first time I went to Walter Reed with the president, and have since stayed in touch with. In fact, I invited him to come by the White House, and he and the other guy that was with him, they came and they said, "We want to come into the briefing." And I was like, okay. And I said, well, the only place that you guys can come in on your wheelchair is if you're on the platform itself. And they were like, we love it. Take us in there. So they came in with me. And both of these people are true American heroes who have given literally everything for this country.
Very last question. It's one I've never asked you.
Oh,
not
dear.
in, not even in private. So I figure, why not ask it in front of several million people? Will you ever run for anything? Are we going to see your name on the ballot someday?
Right now, I'm just happy in the job I have, and so far, God has always led me down a pretty good path, and we'll see where He takes me from here.
I'm glad He brought you over here today to let us visit.
I want to thank Sarah Huckabee Sanders for being my guest here on Conversations. As a reminder, join me on Huckabee every Saturday, 8 Eastern and 7 Central, and again on Sunday, same times, right here on TBN. And thanks for watching.